All right, fantastic. Good evening, dear students. It's a pleasure to be with you. All right. By the way, remember that we are always going to have this 5 minutes of tolerance. Okay. Just in case you were asking why we're starting at 5, or well, in this case at 8:05 p.m. It's because we are always going to have this 5 minutes of tolerance. All right. Just in case, of course, maybe many of you are going to have some troubles to start. As you can see, there are more people joining, so it's always preferable, I think, to have this 5 minutes of tolerance. Nonetheless, we're always going to procure and we're always going to aim to start early. Okay, but thank you very much for having joined me. All right, fantastic. So as I told you, it's a pleasure to be with you. All right, tonight we are starting with the actual classes because for those of you who were present yesterday in the introductory class, we discussed a lot of general aspects about the classes and also the TOEFL exam, but we didn't actually learn anything about the content of the exam itself. But that is exactly what we're going to be doing tonight. All right. And as I told you yesterday, what we are going to be discussing today is the listening section. All right. And it's actually wonderful that you're going to start with this particular topic because here in this, let's say in this particular section, we are going to learn a very important skill that you're going to be using throughout the entire exam. That is how to take notes. All right. So I'm going to be helping you tonight in guiding you throughout this process of learning how to approach the listening section and also learning skills for you to take effective and efficient notes during this part, not only of the listening section, but as well during the entire exam. All right, fantastic. So let me please share my screen with you because of course I have a presentation for you and then we're going to start. All right, so here you have it. By the way, remember that all these classes are always recorded, okay? So that when you want to rewatch these classes later, or maybe you are not able to join us at some particular point during the classes, you're always going to be able to rewatch them in the YouTube channel that is going to be created for your group, okay? Please, as I told you yesterday, wait for a couple of days for the coordinator of our classes to create the YouTube channel, and there all the videos that we are recording are going to be found, okay? The one of the introductory class, this one, and the following days are also going to be included in that YouTube channel that is just for you. All right, fantastic. So as you can see here in my initial slide, today we're going to discuss the TOEFL listening section. And as I told you, I'm very glad that you're starting this week. That is, of course, your first week of classes with this section, because it's actually going to be helpful for you to develop a very, very important skill for the entire exam, and that is how to take notes efficiently, effectively. And you're going to notice that it is tremendously important to take efficient notes during this section. I'm going to give you some tips, okay? I'm going to give you some tips about, let's say, some techniques or strategies that you can use in order for you to take notes correctly, all right? Not in the structure as such, but some techniques. Fantastic. So let's start with the listening section. So let us discuss some general aspects first. I think this is very important. And we're gonna be doing this for all the reading, for all the sections we're gonna be having, the reading one, the writing, the speaking, because I consider that general aspects are always necessary for us to understand the entire topic. So now let us discuss this, okay, particularly. What are the general aspects of this section? First of all, this section is going to measure your ability, all right, to understand spoken English, and it's going to include, let's say, tests and exercises for the following areas: basic comprehension, of course, basic comprehension of English grammar, syntax, well, vocabulary, of course, and also something else, pragmatic understanding. And what I mean by pragmatic understanding is the speaker's attitude and degree of certainty. That is to say, connecting and synthesizing information. Do you know what the word synthesizing information means? It basically means to have the capacity of listen to different information sources, to different, let's say, materials, and making sense of them all in your head so you can understand and deliver an accurate summary and response about the topic you have just listened. All right. So it's very important for you to develop this capacity. And this is something that is going to be constantly evaluated during this section. Your capacity to combine material knowledge from different sources, to remember it, and to always, as I say, being able to convey it in other words with different responses and exercises that ETS is going to propose. All right. So this is very important for you to know with regard to the listening section. Now, there are two types of listening items. And notice that by items, I mean materials. Of course, now that we're discussing the listening section, I think it's very clear that in the listening section, what you're going to be doing is listening, of course, right, to some material and then responding to a series of questions with regard to the materials you just listened, all right? But now, of course, you're not going to listen to any type of material. You're going to have two specific materials that are going to be the ones that will be delivered to you, and then you're going to listen to them through headphones that ETS is going to give you if you are taking the IVT version, right? As we discussed yesterday, if you're going to take the home IVT version, then of course it's going to be a necessity for you to get your own headphones and some sort of device through which you're going to be able to listen and to speak later in the speaking section, not in this one, of course. But nonetheless, if you're going to take the IVT version, that is the most common and normal one, then don't worry about anything of this, because you are going to receive headphones for you to listen to the different contents in this section, and everything you need also to take notes is going to be provided to you. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, please, I direct you to the first class of yesterday, to the introductory class that is going to be available for you, as I told you, maybe tomorrow, maybe on Thursday, because the coordinator is creating the YouTube channel and she's going to upload it to that channel, okay, for you to rewatch the class later. Fantastic. Now, as I was mentioning, there are going to be two types of materials, all right, dear students, in this section. The first type of material is going to be a lecture, and the second one is going to be conversations. You know what the word lecture means? Lecture is basically a class delivered by a professor in a university. That is what lecture means, all right? It's not lecture of reading something, but lecture, a class, something that the professor is teaching his or her students, all right? And you're going to be listening to lectures in this listening section, and then you're going to respond questions, okay, about that particular lecture. By the way, all lectures are going to listen are going to be on academic subjects. That is to say, subjects, topics that could be taught in a university. For example, you could listen to, let's say, a lecture on biology or astronomy or mathematics or chemistry, literature, computer science, medicine. It could be anything. Anything you can think about that is being taught right now in universities could be a possible and very much likely topic of your lecture, all right? So as I say, please know this, because in order to improve maybe your listening for this particular section, it's not very much useful to actually watch, for example, movies or series that have nothing to do with academic English. Because if you notice, lectures, of course, utilize academic English. So if you practice your listening by watching movies or watching series that have nothing to do with science, with academics, well, maybe you're just going to, let's say, harm yourself, because that English is not the one that is used in these classes, okay? So maybe my recommendation for you, if you want to improve your listening, is listen to classes delivered by professors on different academic subjects. Go to YouTube, look for classes on mathematics, on biology, and astronomy. Of course, not learning the subjects themselves, but learning how the professor, as I told you, how so that the professor discusses this, right? And it's very important, as I told you, to remember this as well. Now, what else? Let us continue. Very important, dear students. With regard, for example, to the conversations, this is going to be the second type of material that you're going to be receiving in this listening section. Conversations are going to be basically recordings of two different students in a university discussing discussing a university matter. For example, a change in a university service, discussing what they think about their professors, discussing what they think about the exams. Basically, two students in a university discussing something related to university matters, okay? So as I say, these are the two types of materials you're going to receive, listen to, and then, as I mentioned, to respond a series of questions with regard to those materials. Now, how many, let's say, lectures and how many conversations are you going to have? Well, let me respond to the question. You're going to have 3 to 4 lectures, and each of them is going to be 3 to 5 minutes long, all right? With 6 questions per lecture, all right? Very important. 3 to 4 lectures, each 3 to 5 minutes long, and 6 questions per lecture. Now, moreover, you're also going to have 2 to 3 conversations with 2 speakers, as I told you, each basically lasting 3 minutes long, and with 5 questions per conversation to respond, all right? Now, notice that there is a little variation here. Why is it possible that you could receive 3 to 4 lectures or 2 to 3 conversations? What is that defines it? What is it that make, let's say, your exam to have 3 or 4 lectures, or that makes it to have 2 or 3 conversations? Why is there such a variation? This is something that I already explained to some of your classmates that were present in other topics, because as I told you, you're probably going to have some new classmates that have already, let's say, been present in classes about other sections, but nonetheless they have ever and never listened to anything with regard to the listening section. But I talked to them about something happening in the TOEFL exam that is called the how's this called? That is called the experimental version of the TOEFL exam. And basically this means that for some test takers, okay, this is a possibility, not something that is going to happen yes or yes, ETS is going to give them an experimental version of the TOEFL exam. And what is that experimental version? Well, simple. If you receive the experimental version, when you would normally receive 3 lectures in your listening section, you're not going to receive 3, but 4 instead. Or for example, if you normally receive 2 conversations in your listening section, if you receive the experimental version of the listening section, then you're going to get 3 conversations instead of 2. All right. So as you can see, if you receive the experimental version, it basically means that you're going to have extra material to listen to, and of course, extra questions to respond. All right. But maybe you are wondering, and is this something positive or negative? That is to say, how should I think about this experimental version of the TOEFL exam? Well, let me tell you, it's not actually something to worry about. Why? Maybe because you're thinking, well, but if I receive this experimental version, doesn't this mean that I'm going to receive new things that are not going to be taught in these courses? I have to admit, yes, probably. If you're going to receive the experimental version of the TOEFL exam, maybe you're going to receive some new models of questions, because today we're going to be discussing the different types of questions that there exist in the TOEFL exam. But nonetheless, as I say, dear students, it's not necessary, okay? Not necessary that you're going to receive this experimental version. Now, let me tell you, don't get worried about it, okay? Why? Because even if you receive this experimental version and you get extra material, and in this material, there are things that we have not discussed here because, of course, they're experimental and therefore new, don't worry. Why? Because this extra material you will receive if you get the experimental version of a TOEFL exam will never be considered towards your score. That is to say, you are not going to be evaluated with regard to the performance you have on this experimental version. All your qualification, your scores, your average are always going to be calculated, and you are going to be evaluated in the normal version of the exam. That is to say, in the first 3 lectures and the first 2 conversations, all right, that you would normally receive if you weren't having the experimental version. So if you receive this extra material, yes, perform it. Listen to the conversation, to the lecture, whatever it is, and respond to questions, knowing that that is not going to be considered for your score, okay? It's just a matter through which ETS is able to know what to implement to their classes, what to implement to their exam, maybe what type of mechanism for their questions should they take off of the exam, things of that sort, okay? But as I say, it's not something that is going to affect you nor positively nor negatively, all right? So if you receive the experimental version, don't worry, perform it, do it calmly, because it's never going to affect you, nor in a positive, nor in a negative manner, all right? Now, finally, you can take notes on any audio item throughout the test to help you answer questions, by the way. And this is what I was talking to you about, that something very important in this particular section is that you're going to receive right now, let's say, some techniques and some recommendations for you to take notes, not only for this section that is going to be super important, but also for the rest of the exam. And this is actually a skill that you need to perfect very much, because trust me, notes are tremendously important, okay, for this exam, and especially for this section, all right? Now, maybe you're wondering about how much time you have for listening and responding to these questions overall. Well, you have from 41 to 75 minutes, as I told you, depending on, not 70, 57, excuse me, minutes to complete this section, depending on if you receive the experimental version or if you don't get it, all right? Accordingly, you will have from 1 to 1.5 minutes per question in order to analyze it and respond it. I'm going to show you right now, using the simulator that we have here at the company, how is this exam going to look like on the actual day, right? And I'm going to be able to show you that for every single question you're going to be responding, okay, in this particular section, you are just going to have approximately 1 minute or 1.5 minutes in order to read and respond to every single question, okay, no more than that. But don't worry, I'm going to show you that right now, okay. What else? Okay, so here I'm going to teach you how to take notes, but before we get into that, is there any question about the general aspects, dear students, of the listening section, something that I could clarify? I'm going to be delighted to help you and respond and clarify some doubts. Sergio, Adriana, Alondra, Fabiana, Miguel, Camila, Jorge, Lucia, Sergio, is there any question with regard to the general aspects of the listening section?
Clear. Thank you, Carlos.
All right, thank you very much, Lucia. What about you, guys? Any question? Anything that I could clarify here, the general aspects of the section?
No, I'm okay, Carlos, thank you.
All right, fantastic, Miguel. There you are. Okay, let us continue then with the material. So now let me show you how this is going to look like on the actual exams. I told you, we're able to do this because here we have a simulator. So let's use the simulator for you to see how this actually looks like, okay? Because I think that's very important. You know, when I was learning how to take the exam, remember that I told you yesterday, I took it twice in my life. It was always very difficult and confusing to practice and then not knowing actually how would the exam look like on the real day of the exam, right? Because sometimes the practices are different to the actual exam. So that is not a problem here because we have the simulator that looks tremendously similar to the actual exam, okay? So you're gonna be able to see. So when you get into this section, that reminds, the listening section is basically the second section you're going to be approaching during the exam. Yesterday, I showed you a picture of how is this exam organized and structured. And I told you, right, that the first section we always have is the reading section, then comes the listening, then the 10 minutes break, then the speaking section, and finally the writing section. So after you finish the reading section, this is what is going to be appearing on your screen, all right? You're going to have, as you can see here, an audio, okay? And this audio is going to be basically, well, it's going to be displayed automatically, okay? You don't have to press on it as I'm going to do right now. But nonetheless, there's going to be a voice here in your headphones because, of course, as you can see here in the picture of this woman, you're going to have headphones, right, in this section. For those of you who have not listened to information about this, we're going to discuss it when we come to the speaking section, right, for many of you. So don't worry, but nonetheless, you're going to have some headphones like these ones, right? And basically, you're going to listen to a voice that will say something like, now please listen to an academic topic, or excuse me, to a lecture on the academic topic of biology. And then you're going to be listening to something like this. Please let us listen to that.
Listen to part of a lecture in an astronomy class.
Next, I want to talk about a topic that all of us here on Earth have probably thought about in some way at some time or another. That would be the likelihood of life on other planets. Scientists refer to a planet's ability to develop and sustain life as planet habitability. Planet habitability can be calculated using basic data that we believe to be accurate about far-off planets. They are the same factors that make Earth habitable to us humans. They combine to create a perfect storm, if you will, for conditions that are essential in fostering life. But not only must several of these conditions be met, they must be just right. First,
all right, I think that is sufficient because we're not going to practice right now, but the only thing I wanted was to illustrate to you how does this material is going to be displayed to you, and also well, to illustrate as well, right? How is this going to look like? How will this material be displayed to you, and also how will this material look like on the actual exam? Now let us continue, right? So after you listen to this, of course, imagine that you have listened to it entirely. This is going to stop, and then the computer is going to take you directly to the questions. So in this case, I'm going to press the button next, and this is going to be how your question is going to look like. Now look at it. It says here, what is the lecture mainly about? We're going to be talking about the different types of question, okay, for the listening section, so don't worry about it. But nonetheless, as you can see, there is going to be, as you can notice, the question and some answers, okay? By the way, all the possible answers for this section are going to be multiple choice, all right? So you will never have the necessity to write down anything as a response, okay? Writing down responses is not something actually common in the TOEFL exam, nor is possible in the listening section, all right? So you will always have the necessity to choose a correct answer. Sometimes, maybe, of course, 2 or 3 correct answers, depending on the mechanism that the question proposes to you. But nonetheless, as I mentioned, your students, is multiple choice, okay? You just have to choose 1, 2, or maybe 3 correct answers, let's say, from a series of possible responses, but you don't have to write down anything as a response, all right? So as you can see, you have the question and possible answers. Now, as you can see here, it says next, and this is very important, because if you, for example, let's say you read the question and you manage to find out the response very rapidly, let's say in 30 seconds, and you respond, let's say you think this is the correct one, right? You can press the button next, and when you press it, this is going to take you to the next question, all right? Because remember, for every single lecture, you're going to have 6 questions. For every single conversation, you're going to have 5 questions. So you're going to have to respond 6 questions about the lecture that we just listened to. Of course, we didn't listen to it completely, but nonetheless, as I said, it's an illustration, all right? So as you can see here, we have a second question. Now, this is what I wanted to clarify. Let's say you spent here on this question, because it's very difficult for you, more than 1.5 minutes or something approximate. What is going to happen? That if you spend too much time here in this question, the computer is going to take you out directly. That is to say, it's going to move you to the other question, even if you have not pressed the button that says next, all right? And this is very important, because if you are not actually required to press the button that says next in order to move on to the other question, but the computer is actually able to basically move on the question and to show you another question, you need to be very careful and rapid when responding, okay? Because as I say, if you spend on one question more than 1 minute or 1.5 minutes, what is going to happen is that the software is going to take you directly to the other question, even when you have not pressed the button next. And there is something else. If for example, the computer takes you to the other question and you have not responded, imagine that you have not responded to this, okay? Imagine that you have not responded to this question. What is going to happen? That you cannot go back. As you can see here, there is no button that says previous question or go back. The only button you have is next. So basically, it's like like in a straight line, and the only thing you can do is to advance it straight, but you can never come back. All right. So it's very important, as I say, to always respond to questions, because don't think about, for example, leaving a question in blank and coming back later to respond it, because that is not even possible here. All right. So you have to, as I say, respond to questions in approximately 1 minute or 1.5 minutes. There is no specific nor perfect timing, sadly, but it is approximately that. You're going to find it out when we get into this question later or into these practices later. But nonetheless, as I say, you need to be careful and rapid, okay, when responding, because if you don't respond, and let's say you leave it in blank, the computer is going to take you directly to another question without responding, and you cannot go back to responding later, okay? So try to always respond rapidly as you are able to, okay? So that is it. Basically, this is the menu for all the questions. As you can see, doesn't right. You choose the correct one. If you finish, you press next. If you don't press it, the computer is going to take you anyways to the other question. And you do that until you end, as you can see, with the 6 questions. And when you finish the last question, then, of course, as you can see, let's say this question here, and you're going to be, of course, provided with another lecture or conversation. Doesn't matter. It can be in any order: conversation, lecture, lecture, conversation, conversation, lecture. The order doesn't matter, but the point is that you're going to receive, as I told you, normally 3 lectures and normally 2 conversations, unless you receive the experimental version of the exam. All right. Is there any question with regard to the menu, to how will the exam look like on the actual day? Anything that I could clarify, dear students? Anything here?
Carlos, is there the possibility that for one question is there a multiple choice answer? Maybe 2
Yes.
or 3?
Yes.
What about if we answer wrong one of them?
Then in that case, what will happen is that because all this section, the listening section and the reading section, are punctuated or evaluated by a software. So what is going to happen is that basically the software is not going to give you the complete qualification that response will have if you were responding it correctly. That is to say, for example, if the question was worth 2 points, if you get in this case, right, of multiple choices, if you just get, let's say, in a question that requires you to get and to choose 3 correct responses, you just get 2 of them and 1 incorrectly, then the computer is going to give you maybe 1.5 or 1.5 or 1.5 instead of 2 points. That, as I told you in this illustration, would be the actual value of the question overall if you responded correctly. But nonetheless, if you have this, let's say this situation in which you have a multiple choice a question which you have to choose a lot of correct responses, the computer is going to evaluate how much to give you depending on how well you responded, how fast you responded. But yes, it's not going to give you the complete value for the question.
Okay, so if there is so partial answers though.
Yes, oh, yes, certainly. There are some questions that, as you can see, are in just one response. That is to say, you don't have the capacity to choose more than one correct responses, but there are other questions in which you are able to do it. And if you don't respond to that question with the entireness of the correct responses, then, as I say, probably the software is not going to give you the entire value of the question, but it's going to give you maybe 1.5. If the question was worth 2 points, it's going to give you 1.5 or something like that. Well, of course, it's difficult to measure that, but something like that is going to happen. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure, Miguel. Any other questions, Sergio, Fabiana, Lucia, any of you guys? Anything?
Nope, everything is clear. Thank you.
For me, is everything clear, Carlos? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, dear Lucia. Fantastic. There you are. Okay, so this is the menu, okay, guys? Just in case you wanted to know, this is how will you be responding to these questions through a menu like this one, very similar, okay? So here you are. What else? Okay, so now let us come back to the presentation and let us learn how to take notes, all right? Because as I told you, I think it's very important for you to know how to take notes. This is actually a very important skill for you to polish and for you to perfect, all right, during this section, also throughout the entire exam. So let's discuss the listening notes, all right? 101. So how to take notes on this section, very important. First recommendation or first clarification I wanted to make. To begin with, don't forget that all the sheets of papers and pencils you will need to take your notes will be provided to you by your test center, okay? That is if you're taking the IVT version or the PBT version. But if you were present in yesterday's introductory class, I talked about this, right? The different versions of the TOEFL exam, the IVT version, the home IVT version, the PBT version, and basically in the IVT version and PBT version, ETS provides you everything you need to take the exam: a computer, pencils, papers, devices, keyboards, headphones, microphones, everything. But nonetheless, if you're taking a home IVT version, it's completely different because you're taking it at home. And of course, ETS is not going to provide you with anything apart from the material that, of course, they're going to let you have. So if you're taking the IVT version or the PBT version in which you have to go to a test center to have the test in person, don't worry about your material to take notes, right? Because ETS is going to give you everything. You are not actually allowed nor permitted to get into the computation room or into the examination room without any of your, let's say, of your items. If, for example, if you brought with you your notebook in order to study when you were arriving the place, I don't know, in your car or something, you are not going to be allowed to enter the computation room or the examination room with that material, with your notebooks or with your pencils, nothing. You are going to be the only thing getting into the examination room, because any other material, they are basically going to, well, they are going to take it off. That is to say, they are going to require it from you. They're going to save it and they're going to return it back to you when the exam is over. But yes, they're going to provide you with everything. Now, if you're taking the home IVT version, it's a completely different story. You need to provide yourself with a small desktop whiteboard, because if you're taking the home IVT version, you cannot take notes on paper, okay? ETS does not allow you to do that. But the only possible way you have to take notes is through a small desktop, okay, whiteboard. That is to say, una pizarra blanca with erasable marker. You know, these ones that maybe in your high school your professors use, or I don't know, maybe you have seen this one in a university. Whiteboards, right, with erasable marker. You need to get one, and not one of those, you know, very huge measurements, but you need to get one that is desktop size. That is to say, a very much small whiteboard, and that is going to be the material, or let's say the surface on which you're going to write down your notes, okay? And of course, you have a difficulty there that you're going to have to erase and rewrite your notes as you go about writing them, because of course, if you write down on a surface like that, on a very small whiteboard, then that means, of course, that you're not going to have the entire space you would have on paper, right? And of course, in paper, you just change the sheet of paper. You don't have to erase anything. But in this case, if you're going to take the home IVT version, you have to erase and rewrite again and again whenever you don't have more space. So as I told you, it's a matter of considering all these things and deciding which particular category is, well, maybe the most suitable, or let's say beneficial or advantageous for you. But please consider these things, okay? With regard to notes in the different versions of the TOEFL exam. Now, second recommendation, dear students, what you can do, all right, to save time and maintain order in your notes is to prepare your sheet or your whiteboard, whatever, with some points marking the beginning of each note. Let me explain to you what I mean by this. Look at my image here. For example, this is a normal sheet of paper, right? And as you can see, it's in blank. So I recommend you that whenever you're about to start writing notes, the first thing you have to do is to create somehow a structure for you to know where are your notes ending and where are they starting. That is to say, when you start a note, where is the note going to start, finish, and where is it starting, so that you don't get confused at the end when you want to review your notes. For example, if you have forgotten something, of course you have to go and review your notes, because maybe something that I didn't mention, or at least I didn't emphasize very much, is that when you listen, okay, to this reading passages, excuse me, not reading, to this listening passages, to the lecture or to the conversation, your students, you don't have the chance to do it again. You just listen to them once, all right? So you listen to the lecture, you take notes, and the reason why you take notes is because, of course, you want to remember what you have listened to, right? If you forget. So please don't be, let's say, confident on the fact that you're going to listen to it twice or maybe 3 times, and you say, well, I'm going to pay attention the next time, right? Or I'm going to pay attention to that part next time. No, you're just going to listen to all materials once, all right? So you need to be very much careful in order to take notes so you can remember those particular elements that you are, of course, going to forget, because we are humans and we are very much prone to forget things, right? So maybe that happens to you. So as I say, in order for you to access your notes very much smoothly and comfortably, I recommend you to do something like this: to organize your sheet of paper with points or any other, let's say, mark you have, to identify where is your note starting and ending. So that, for example, when you have a question that you cannot respond, you go back to your notes and you say, okay, in this note that I remember that I wrote here at the first, at the beginning of my paper, I'm going to go and check it out in order to see if there maybe I wrote something that could help me to respond. So you're going to be able to locate that particular note easily because you have this mechanism, right? Follow something similar to this, all right? Now, further, try not to be very extensive, dear students, with any of your notes. Why? Because if you are very extensive, what you're going to be doing at the end is going to be paying more attention to your notes, all right? And that is something actually not very much, let's say, advantageous. Why? Because, dear students, the reason why you are taking notes is not because you are, let's say, going to be evaluated with regard to your notes. Nobody is going to read your notes and say, hey, what an ugly letter this test taker has. No, that is not going to happen. Nobody's going to read your notes. You just need to make your notes understandable to you. And as I say, you are listening, okay? You are writing in order to remember what you listen. You are not listening to write down notes. I'm going to repeat that. You are writing notes in order to remember what you listen, but you are not listening because you want to write down your notes, okay? So what your priority must be is listening to the lecture, to the conversation that ETS is going to deliver to you. Your priority must not be your notes, must not be your beautiful letter with beautiful punctuation, in this case, right, in your notes. Your priority must not be if you are making your letters too big or too small. Not at all. Your priority must be listening to the lecture, to the conversation, not writing down your notes, okay? As I say, this is a matter of being concise, of being understandable, and being efficient, all right? That is what we are going to discuss right now. So, third recommendation. In order to write down your notes efficiently, I recommend you to do the following. You should write down only information words and leave out function words. Let me explain what I mean by information words and what I mean by function words. For example, information words are meaningful words that contain significance, such as, for example, people, places, actions, and descriptions. And function words are things like prepositions, articles, auxiliary verbs, modals, may, could, which provide almost no useful information about the material. Let me please exemplify this by directing you towards the example or to the box that I have here on the right side of my screen. Let us read together. It says, insomnia, a consistent difficulty in falling or staying asleep, is the most common of the sleep disorders. Now, please, dear students, imagine that you listen to this on the exam. Let's say you are listening to a lecture on psychology, or you're listening to a lecture, I don't know, on biology, whatever. So they discuss insomnia, a consistent difficulty in falling or staying asleep, is the most common of the sleep disorders. If you listen to this in your lecture, how could you take a note about that particular sentence or information? I recommend you to write down a note similar to this one. Insomnia, common disorder. No more than that. If you notice, insomnia, common, and disorder are all of them information words. That is to say, they are words that if you read them, they convey to you an idea immediately. This is compared, and this is basically the opposite to function words. As for example, a function word in this particular first sentence would be a word like a, in, or, is, the, of. Those are words that if you think about them, they are function words. That is to say, they help us to improve our writing. They make our language more understandable, more concise, more united. But nonetheless, in this case, we are not interested in writing sentences correctly or with the best grammar possible. No, we are interested in remembering, okay? You remember what I told you, right? I told you, you are writing down your notes in order to remember what you listen. So your objective must be writing down notes that help you to remember what you have listened quickly, rapidly, and concisely. So in this case, as I say, write down your notes with information words, words that transmit significance, transmit a particular meaning, a particular idea. Insomnia, common disorder. If you read this, you rapidly remind, right? And remember, oh, insomnia was a disorder. It was a common disorder, right? So you continue, and for example, maybe you forgot what insomnia was. So if you go back to your note and you read this, this is going to help you to remember immediately, right? Instead of writing down a note that is super long with function words, etc. The same would be, for example, for the third option. Chronic insomnia is almost always associated with feeling overtired and maybe associated with symptoms of depression. Look at this sentence, for example. Chronic symptoms overtired depression. That would be the note. Chronic symptoms overtired depression. Because if you write down all those words, they convey you an idea that you listened in your lecture that chronic insomnia is almost always associated with feeling overtired and maybe associated with symptoms of depression. So symptoms, chronic, overtired, depression. By writing down these words, I think it's completely possible, as I said, to remember what you listened to, right? Instead of writing, for example, the chronic insomnia is very much, let's say, provoking of overtired feelings and depression. For example, if you write down a note like that, you're not only using a lot of function words, but you're making it super, super lengthy. And by making it lengthy, you are, as I said, harming yourself because, as I told you, you are writing down this not because you want to, let's say, stand out in your notes, but you want to remember what you have listened, all right? Very important. Final recommendation for writing notes, very important. Try to abbreviate your words, dear students, okay? Write abbreviated words. For example, you remember the difference between the consonants and the vowels? Vowels consist of the letter, for example, A, E, I, O, U, sometimes Y, right? Consonants are all the other letters, B, C, D, F, and so on. So here's the interesting part. Vowels are so common that you could write a word without any of its vowels and still understand the meaning. Let me give you some illustrations. For example, the word sleep. If you're planning to write down this word in your notes, but you want to, as I said, save a little bit of time, take advantage of every single space and let's say capacity in your hand you have, well, how can you write down this word? Instead of writing it completely and writing S-L-E-E-P, why don't you write, for example, S-O-P? I think that it's very obvious that this word means sleep, right? Or something related to sleeping. Or symptoms, for example, S-M-P-T-M-S, or depression, D-P-R-S-M, right? Now, of course, there are some words maybe that are a little bit difficult to remember or to understand if you don't include one or two vowels. So what I recommend you in that case is, of course, include some vowels whenever you consider that your words are not going to be understandable without the vowels. And actually, it's not necessary to follow this technique, yes or yes. The point is that you need to abbreviate words. However, you're able to abbreviate words if you're maybe writing down just the half of, if you're writing half of the word, or if you're writing the first 3 letters of a word, and you're able to remember the word and to understand it with that little information and a small information, well, why not? Go for it. The point is, as I say, abbreviating words. When you abbreviate words, you're going to take very much efficient notes. And as I say, you're going to be paying more attention to the listening item instead of the notes. And that is what you have to do, okay? To be more focused and concentrated, not on the words, not on the notes, but concentrated way more on the listening items, the lectures and the conversations, all right? Fantastic. Is there any question about how to take notes on this section, dear students? Anything that I could clarify?
No, nothing to clarify. Just we're gonna have to put this on practice on the practice
Certainly.
class. So that's the important thing.
Yes, yes, you're right. Thank you very much, Lucia. Fantastic. So is there any other question with regard to how to abbreviate these words, how to take notes on the section? Anything? Or we can move on to the first type of question in the listening section. Nope? Fantastic. So now let us get into the types of questions you will find in this section. Now let me explain for those of you who are new. Why are we going to discuss the types of questions you will find in this section? Well, simple. Because as I told you at the beginning, the TOEFL exam is very much repetitive and is also predictable. That is to say, listen to what I'm going to express right now. The way they ask questions is always similar, although what they ask is always different. Or maybe you prefer it in the other way around. What they ask in the exams is always different, of course. You're always going to have a different topic, a different reading passage, a different lecture and conversation in all the exams that are being held in the entire world. For example, let's say that there is an available time for you to take the exam on October 1st or on October 2nd. If you take the exam at that time and you take it again in November, the exam you're going to receive is going to be completely different. The topics are not going to be repeated. The information is not going to be the same. The questions are not going to be the same. But the way they ask for information is always the same. What they ask is different, but the way they ask is always the same. So given that that is the case, what we can do is to analyze how do they ask, okay, the questions we can see in the listening section, actually in different sections of this exam, and to learn the patterns that exists in the questions. So when we analyze and understand the patterns that are present in the different type of questions, then we can also know how to respond consistently and constantly. Because think about it, if the way they ask is always very similar, then that means logically that the way to respond must be as well very similar, right? So by knowing the type of questions we're going to find in this section, we can also know how to respond the types of questions that we're going to find in this particular exam always correctly, not very much and constantly and in a very unstable way. Because maybe something worries you, that is that for some test takers, it has been always difficult to remain constant. That is to say, when they practice a simulation, they get 100, but on the exam, they get 80. But by knowing the type of questions and the type of responses and how to respond and approach every single type of question, my aim is that you are able to have constancy, to be constant when responding. So for example, if we practice here an exercise and we make a simulation, you get exactly the same on the actual exam, right? That is the idea. So let's get into the different types of questions for this particular section. The first type of question, dear students, is called the listening main idea question, all right? And now let me tell you what this type of question is all about. So the every single listening sample or item, as I told you, there are two different types of items in this section, right? First of all, you have the conversations and you have the lectures. So as I told you, every single listening sample will begin in the same way with a main idea question. This is actually something very much ironic, thinking about the reading section that some of you were present last week when we discussed the reading section with the old group. And we said that the last type of question you receive in the reading section is always a summary question. But in this case, it's the other way around. the first question you will always have in your series of 6 questions for lectures or in your series of 5 questions for conversations is always going to be a main idea question. It's always going to be a question of this type, a main idea question. Now, what is this type of question all about? Let me explain. These questions ask you to identify the main point of the lecture or conversation. They usually take one of the following forms. This is the wording of the questions, by the way. If you read something like this or similar to this wording, then you can identify and say, oh, this is a main idea question. Okay, so it's very important for you to identify the type of question so that you know what technique or approach to use in order to respond to questions successfully. Now, let us read the wording, the possible wordings. What is the main idea of the lecture? What subject is the professor mainly discussing? Or what was the conversation mainly about? Again, I repeat, what is the main idea of the lecture? What subject is the professor mainly discussing, or what was the conversation mainly about? If you read something similar to this, then you know, okay, this is a main idea question. Now, let us see an example, because of course, through an illustration, you're going to be able to understand this way more clearly. Before we get into this example, let us go and listen, of course, to a listening item, because without it, we wouldn't be able to ask anything, right? So please, I want you to please right now put into practice every single technique and recommendation I have given you with regard to how to take notes in this section, okay? Because we're going to listen to a lecture, I think it is on art, okay, on the academic topic of art, and we're going to listen to this, all right, entirely in this case, and I want you to apply everything we have learned, okay? Try to take your notes, and then we're going to use that information in order to respond to this type of question for this exercise, all right? So please, all of you, begin listening to this lecture on an academic topic.
How many of you have heard of Alessandro di Mariano Giovanni Filippi? No? Nobody? Well, let me put it this way. How many of you are familiar with the work of an artist called Sandro Botticelli, or even just Botticelli? Yeah, that's what I thought. It's definitely an easier name to remember. But a lot of you might also be surprised to learn that this artist, who we know so well, really fell out of favor from shortly after the Renaissance until the late 19th century. That's right, it's really only within the past 150 years that Botticelli's work has returned to popularity. And yet within that time, his name, well, his alias, has become synonymous with a kind of grace and beauty that characterizes the best of Renaissance painting. Patronized by the famous Medici family, Botticelli was celebrated during his lifetime for using these qualities of grace and beauty in his artwork. And while his earliest paintings often used religious subject matter, well, we've seen this throughout the course, haven't we, how common this was? These aren't the works that are most celebrated today. In fact, let me ask you, what are the paintings that you most associate with Botticelli? If you're thinking The Birth of Venus, you're definitely not alone. The Birth of Venus is definitely one of Botticelli's better-known works. His masterpiece, Primavera, was painted 3 years earlier. That's another one that you might know. And it was done in the same vein as The Birth of Venus. Primavera means spring in Italian, and here's a slide of the painting up on the board. These are works that didn't rely entirely on the iconography of the Catholic Church. While we do see some holdovers from Botticelli's earlier works, the main subjects of these paintings go back to traditions of gods and goddesses. Note the extensive use of nature as a metaphor, in addition to the nudity of some of the figures, or the skimpy clothes used to cover them. Actually, Botticelli was extremely religious and would end up painting work for churches and cathedrals, using Catholic iconography for the rest of his life. The Madonna and Child, for example, was a popular subject. Because of the popularity of his work, it's kind of strange that he fell out of favor. His paintings were in churches, chapels, and villas all over Italy. But in 1502, almost a decade before he died in 1510, Botticelli was already disappearing from the public eye. Even though he had painted frescoes in the Sistine Chapel, Botticelli's work was commonly overlooked in favor of that of his neighboring artist, Michelangelo. It took almost 3 centuries before an English collector, William Young Otley, bought a Botticelli in Italy and brought it back to England in 1799. Even then, the painting wasn't exhibited in public for almost another 60 years, when its next owner, William Fuller Maitland, lent it to an Art Treasures exhibition in 1856. There, more than 1 million viewers saw it, and art historians began to take note. Some of these historians had already taken an interest in Botticelli's Sistine Chapel frescoes, and his reputation again began to blossom. By the end of the century, Botticelli's works had been extensively admired. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood found inspiration in them. The first monograph, or book of paintings, by the artist was published in 1893. Botticelli had the last laugh. In the first 20 years of the 20th century, more books were written about his art than about the art of any other painter, dead or alive. It just goes to show you, the art world is ruled by trends. Just because a particular artist isn't popular at a given moment, it doesn't mean that there's no value in his or her work, or that it won't be popular once more, even if it does take 3 centuries.
All right, there you are. Fantastic, right? So as you can see, that would be an example, I would say a very good example of how difficult and complex this lectures will be. Now, of course, maybe you found it to be very much easy. Fantastic. If you found it to be a little bit complex, maybe, as I said, my recommendation is try to look for material that could help you to improve your listening in this academic English, right? Because this is academic English. This is English that professionals use, that scholars use, and the English that is being utilized in universities nowadays, right? I'm going to give you material anyways tomorrow for you to practice and improve this particular subject or regard, that is to say, your academic English. Nonetheless, you can, of course, start researching by yourself some material that could help you. And there is a lot of material, trust me, on the internet with regard to academic lectures delivered by professors that are free, and you can just listen to them and practice that, that listening, and to have the ability to understand them clearly and to somehow be used to the way they speak, right? Because the way that professors speak is actually very interesting. They have a very complex grammar. Their syntax is different from the one that we use normally in our day-to-day lives. So definitely it's a very good idea to start listening to this type of material in order to improve your listening for this section, all right? Now let us discuss the question. A main idea question for this lecture will be something like this. What is the main point of the professor's lecture? I repeat, what is the main point of the professor's lecture? A, people today should know more about different styles that Botticelli used. B, Botticelli's career exemplifies certain historical tendencies of the artwork. C, we can never know the artists who might be popular in the future. D, Botticelli's religious paintings were more important than his paintings that depicted non-religious subjects. There you are. Those would be the 4 different options. And in this case, of course, you can see what is the correct answer, but nonetheless, let me give you some recommendations before we respond to the question. In order to correctly choose your answers, you must be very precise, your students, in choosing only those answers that convey the central idea of a passage. Now, dear students, let me tell you what is not a central idea. A central idea is not necessarily the first thing that is mentioned in the lecture. Okay, listen to me. It's not necessarily the first idea or topic that is mentioned in a lecture, okay? Because many people believe that the first words of the professor is, let's say, the main idea, but it's not necessarily the case. It could be, but it's not necessarily the case. It is not also necessarily the last topic discussed in the lecture. Many people believe that as well, that the last words of the professor in the lecture are necessarily as I told you, are necessarily the main idea, but that is not the case. And as I told you, finally, it's not necessarily what you remember the most, okay? The central idea is not necessarily what you remember the most about the lecture. Maybe you remembered a particular part of the lecture because you thought it was curious or it was funny, and you just, I don't know, somehow appropriated for yourself, and you have been laughing about it, although mentally, of course, well, with regard to this particular point, and that's the reason why you reminded, but nonetheless, it doesn't mean that it is the central idea. Now, what is the main idea or the central idea then? The main idea, okay, of any lecture or any conversation is always that idea that frames all the data and discussion. By framing, I mean basically encerrar, que circunvala, que encierra, right, all discussion and data. That is what I mean by frame. So you need to look for an idea that makes all the information, all the data, all the knowledge that has been discussed in the reading passage, excuse me, not in the reading passage, in the listening passage, in the lecture, or in the conversation. You need to find what makes it a whole. You need to find what makes it a unity. Tienen que encontrar lo que lo haga un todo. That idea that surrounds everything, that frames, that closes everything, that is the main idea, right? That is the main idea of the passage. And you need to look for that particular idea that makes everything a whole, that connects everything, that makes it, as I say, a unity, right? And that is what you need to look for. That is the main idea, all right? Second, don't let yourself to be deceived by some answers presenting you textual references from the passage. Many answers may contain material that is indeed in the passage, but you should ask yourself, if this was a contingent detail, that is to say something you can dispense with, or this was actually the main idea. Many responses are going to try to confuse you by giving you possibilities about topics that were not central in the lecture, but were mentioned anyways. For example, how the professor in this case mentioned, let's say, a joke at the beginning, right? How she said that, have you ever heard about, and she said a name, right? But have you ever heard about Botticelli, right? Maybe a possible answer is going to say the main idea is the confusion that exists nowadays about Botticelli's name. But of course, that is not the main idea, right? Because it was a super tiny moment in the entire lecture, and it's not what frames the entire information, right? And not what frames the entire data and knowledge that has been presented to us in this reading passage, or excuse me, in this listening passage. I know I always say reading, but the point is that the main idea, as I say, is what frames, what closes, what makes everything a unity. That is what you have to look for. Finally, in this case, the correct response is answer B. Botticelli's career exemplifies certain historical tendencies of the art world. Why is this the correct word? The correct response? Because if you think about it, the professor's main point is that Botticelli's work shows that some artists fall in and out of popularity over time. If you missed this, it might have been because you stopped listening towards the end of the lecture. A good reminder to stay alert. Why? Because at the end of the lecture, the professor actually said what was the main idea, right? She said, and now all of this illustrates us and help us to understand that Botticelli exemplifies, right, something that could happen in art. That although some artists are not known nor recognized today, it doesn't mean that their art is not going to be appreciated in the future, right? So she said what was the main idea that unified everything and that made it a whole. That is to say, what framed her entire discussion about Botticelli, that he exemplified a tendency in art. That is to say, that some artists fall in and out of popularity over time. Botticelli's career exemplifies certain historical tendencies of the art world. For example, it's not answer A. People today should know more about the different styles that Botticelli used, because the professor actually doesn't make much emphasis on Botticelli's styles, but she talks about more how was true, or how was a fact in his life that he was not very much appreciated by people in his time, but nonetheless nowadays his name is being recognized and his art as well. So she never emphasized on this, right? It's not certainly the correct response. See, we can never know the artists who might be popular in the future. Maybe it's tempting to you, but think about it. It never says, or it never talks about the artists that can be possible in the future. No, it doesn't say that. The lecture is that Botticelli illustrates how some artists, although they are not famous today, nor appreciated today, can be in the future. But it never says anything about how can we know, or we can never know the artists who might be popular in the future, right? That is not something mentioned in the passage. But what is mentioned is so that some artists, although right now they are not appreciated, they could be appreciated in the future, right? That is a trending art. But it never says, or it never talks about, as I mentioned, how can we know who will be popular in the future or who will not be popular, okay? Finally, D, Botticelli's religious paintings were more important than his paintings that depicted non-religious subjects. All right, of course, this is not true because this doesn't unify the entire reading part. Excuse me, listening section. Any question, your students, about the main idea question that we have discussed here, how to respond to it, what criteria should you use, anything?
Everything's clear, Carlos. Thank you very much.
All right, fantastic. Any of you, Sergio, Miguel, Fabiana,
It's
Adriana,
okay,
Alondra?
teacher.
Okay, Jorge, Sergio, Mayra, Anaí.
Very clear.
Any question?
Thank you.
All right, fantastic. Very
It's
good.
clear.
Thank you very much, Miguel. There we are. So here is where we're going to stop today. If you notice, we have actually finished with all the general aspects with the skills you need to have in order to write down efficient notes, and we have actually finished with one type of the type of questions for this section. So we're going to continue with that tomorrow. So please don't go and take your assistance, as I told you yesterday. Very important. I'm going to stop sharing this. All right. And as I told you, please, dear students, help me with the traditional poll that we are always going to fill at the end of every single class. You help me a lot, okay, by filling it positively. All right, so here you have the poll. Please look at your screen now, and I'm gonna take your assistance. So please, if you listen to your name, say present for the evidence that you have been here. All right, fantastic. So let's go with the list. Is here present Ramirez Camila Bocangel?
Present.
Thank you very much, Camila. What about Salguero Fabiana?
Present.
Thank you very much, Fabiana. What about Quiroga Adriana? Is here?
I'm here.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Adriana. What about Zúñiga Sergio?
I'm here, present.
Thank you very much. What about Alondra Lisette Urquizo?
I'm here, teacher.
Thank you very much, Alondra. What about José Miguel Quiroga?
Here.
There you are. Fantastic. Thank you. What about Anaí Estefania?
Present.
Anaí? Thank you very much, Anaí. Fantastic. What about Jorge Alberto Benítez?
Present.
Thank you very much, Jorge. And here the other group. What about Guzmán Guadalupe Céspedes? No. What about Guzmán Raiza, Bolivia? Raiza wasn't present. What about Lucia?
Present.
Thank you very much, Lucia. And Sergio, what about Sergio? See your Sergio?
Present.
Thank you very much, dear Sergio. Fantastic. There we go. Okay. And Ezequiel, Rafael Ezequiel Severo. Okay, Rafael was not here. There we are. Fantastic, dear students. Thank you very much, okay, for your responses. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Tomorrow, we're going to continue with this, and we're going to stop, right, with the type of questions for this section. And it's going to be a pleasure to be with you, okay? Tomorrow, I'm going to send material to the WhatsApp group, so please don't worry about that. And we're going to continue with this, all right? Have a wonderful night. See you tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye. See you
Bye
tomorrow.
bye.
Thank you very much,
you.
Lucia.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. See you later. See you. Bye-bye.